So those are the 6 kind of underlying beliefs or principles that we think effective teachers of English and writing kind of need to have. So do they sit kind of, you know, with you as experienced teachers? Do they sit with things that you would also kind of hold, that you think would be important? Okay. And I think we could probably ask Linda about those, and I'm sure she would kind of, I'm confident that she would say that she did believe those things. Just a reflection point, again, just for a couple of minutes. To what extent do you think your own and your department writing aligns with those principles? Like thinking about your own beliefs and the people that you work with in your schools and your areas. You know, to what extent do you think that those principles exist? 4 types of knowledge that we kind of think that, and that the resource talks about, that we think is necessary to be an effective writer. So firstly is what I'm calling genre knowledge. I've put it in the inverted commas there because genre is one of those words that's used in many different ways. In this context, I'm using genre in the sense of the key text types and forms that students will encounter. So they need to know, you know, those rules, the forms of those kind of major important genres in our society. And I think we need to be explicit about that. That whole kind of, the Australians amongst us will know that that's been a very strong kind of part of teaching in Australia, especially in the last couple of decades, has been explicit and overt about teaching genre forms. Next thing I think is really important is what's called what I'm calling strategic knowledge. So this is strategies not just about how to kind of structure a piece of writing, but also strategies about how to deal with the processes involved in writing. So strategies to deal with kind of how do I start? What do I do if I'm stuck? How can I expand on things? So, you know, writing, like all those kind of things, is a very difficult task, involves a lot of cognitive kind of areas, and strategy instruction, giving the kids better abilities to deal with all those things and to develop their metacognition, I think is really important. Third one clearly would be linguistic knowledge. Developing student knowledge and skill and using increasingly kind of complex and sophisticated vocabulary, language resources, literacy devices, you know, syntax, all those kinds of things. And the last one is a little bit different, but I think is really important, is actually content knowledge. We have to develop the students' kind of content knowledge about things that we're asking them to write about. And I think we do that really well when we're teaching literary essays. You know, you think about how many weeks do we spend on the content, you know, unpacking the work, understanding it, getting all sorts of ideas and things before we ask them to do a writing of a literature kind of response type essay. And I think about my own practice and compare, well, okay, I spend a lot of that time developing content knowledge, but when I'm doing creative writing, how much time do I spend developing their content knowledge about what they're going to write about? Or how do I do that? And I think that's an interesting kind of question to think about the difference between how we teach creative writing and how we teach kind of more transactional writing. And students need to, you know, I mean, they can explore things, you know, we can get them inquiry so that they can discover things, but I think they do have to have some knowledge before they can write about stuff. So those are 4 kind of areas of key kind of knowledge or skills that we kind of think is important. This is the kind of like what they need to know, and then the effective teaching strategies are the how can we do that. We're going to see another few minutes from the DVD. This time we're going to, and in the next 2 excerpts of watching from the DVD, we're looking at it in terms of the play by practice, and we're going to look at 2 practices today. So this first one is emphasize that writing is a process. And in this clip, I think there's maybe 2 or 3 of the teachers. We just get like a minute or 50 seconds of them where this idea kind of comes up.
So creative writing at our school used to be that we'd do it in the first term, we'd teach it, and then they'd have a 5-period stretch where they had to do their summative assessment. And it was too little time between the learning and actually having to do the work. And we weren't getting the development of skills, and they were feeling a bit disheartened about creative writing. So we've changed it this year so that we're doing a folio approach, and they get to work on creative writing throughout the whole year. And their sort of final piece is only really done right at the very end of the year. So from students that are just out of year 10 and are quite young and unskilled, they get to practice skills and build on their learning and develop that throughout the year by doing lots of different pieces of drafting. And at the end of the year, they get to revisit things that they've done at points throughout the year to then make a selection, look on things with fresh, more experienced eyes. They're better able to make judgments of what's good or not so good, and then have an opportunity right at the end of the year with all their skills and wealth of knowledge and practice and everything, that they can make a selection and craft that piece for a final piece at the end.
The writing process is one which really starts at the stage of teacher modelling and moves to collaborative work in the classroom, so that students do work together and build up confidence with tasks and their writing. But in the end, in a senior writing program, students have to demonstrate that they can actually achieve the standard on their own.
We looked at angles in class on the feature article and looked at cartoons from the New Zealand Herald website so that we could see sort of in visual text as to what angles were.
Well, when I saw the cartoon, it reminded me of how frustrated I'd been when I'd heard on the news about the mining of the national parks and all the emotions of like frustration and anger that they would be doing something like that. And then when we looked more closely to try and find what the angle was of the cartoons in class, it helped me to see what different angles I could take on the issue.
All the students are at the polishing stage, but that really means different things for different students. Some students really needed to just focus on getting their work to an achieve level, but for some other better writers in the class, I really wanted to give them feedback which might help them to go beyond the achieved and to look to those higher levels. Show me where you've got some precision up here.
It's regard a dark place in the valley of unspoiled native forest.
Yep.
When I read my work aloud, for some reason it brings up what words don't match, what rhythms or what syntax isn't working, and so it sort of helps me to see the holes in my writing.
You know, I'll just give you some guidance in this first part of your writing, and then you need to look through the rest of your writing and find some of those things elsewhere as well. So I wanted this piece to be more of a hands-off piece. We had done quite a lot of work earlier on some issues like common sentence errors, and so I really wanted students to be able to apply some of the learning from there and to use them in this piece of writing. What can you do? Is there any way that you could even make 2 sentences out of it?
You give me good feedbacks and what I need to work on, like sentence structures and like how to make it more like formal instead of oral, as you said. Yeah, so I try to do more better.
Such as their family and friends. What's happening here when I'm reading them?
You're running out of breath.
It might be. I mean, an option is not necessarily to just have one sentence, but to think about breaking it up into maybe a couple of sentences. Yeah? Okay, so there are the kinds of changes that I want you to look for, or the kinds of things that you might need to fix throughout your piece, because you're very close to achieving, and it's just those tidying up, that crafting aspect that I want to see you doing. Okay? All right.
Thanks.
From we?
You read it from we.
We seem to think that when we drink alcohol, it must be a lot over a small period of time. Right. Yes.
What do we got here?
I'm not sure what it's called, but I can see the problem.
Yeah.
Okay, so in there, obviously, we're getting now on to kind of talking about the effective practices. Just to kind of reflect about what we saw there about the teaching writing as a process. So in New Zealand, in our NCEA system, creative writing and also now formal writing or transactional writing is an internal standard. And the approach that Jess talked about at the beginning of her Year 11 program of kind of we teach stuff for 3 weeks and then we have a 5-period block has been quite a common approach to teaching creative writing standard in the senior kind of secondary school in New Zealand. And the shift towards a portfolio approach is starting to kind of happen a bit more, and that's what they tried at Lincoln High School in 2010. And the reasons for doing the portfolio approach, I think she explained pretty well about that kind of building knowledge, keeping on, doing bits all during the year, and then finally you're able to kind of apply that as your skills are built up towards the end. So that's kind of why they did that. And I think that kind of approach really does emphasise that writing is a process. I think it does what Terry said about builds students' awareness of what they're doing over time, and so they can kind of learn to pay attention to what they've done or what they haven't done in their writing. Mari Stribling from Hagley Community College, I think, is a really good example for New Zealand teachers about drawing that line between giving feedback that is useful feedback but still enables the kids to actually do it themselves. So that she's giving guidance, but she's not telling them the answers. And she talked about the hands-on, hands-off kind of approach. That's kind of talked about in our standards in New Zealand. That guidance is talked about doing a hands-off and hands-on. And I think she's a really good example of kind of doing that. One of the other practices in there is giving feedback, and she's really skilled at kind of giving that kind of feedback where she's giving guidance. So she's been a teacher, but the kids have to make independent decisions. So the 7 instructional practices. So I'm wanting you now to kind of think about, well, what are the things that you've noticed and what we've talked about so far, what you're thinking back to Linda in the first example from your own practice, and kind of see whether these 7 instructional practices that are talked about here, again, kind of resonate, seem to kind of cover the main areas. And it's possible that there might be gaps or things, but we'll see. So first one is that instruction clearly describes learning intentions and success criteria for the task. I think Linda did that really well. So that it's very purposeful kind of work, and the students are very clear about what is the intent, what is the purpose of their doing, and how will they know if they've succeeded in the task that they're trying to do. Linda had that good example where the kids actually came up with the success criteria themselves, or they collaborated on making the success criteria as a whole class for the poetry exercise. Instruction that involves students in collaborative approaches is really well kind of a lot of research evidence that actually kids learn really well when they're able to collaborate with others and to share ideas. However, it's also important that there's chances for individual goal-directed work and inquiry. What I mean by individual goal-directed work is that you might, like